A Ghost in the Machine, chapters 25, 26, and 27, When Hope Stirs. Chapter 25. Teddy entered the brightly colored room, smiling as he saw Catherine. "Hey, Cat," he said softly, setting down the small container he carried on the table beside her bed, before kissing her brow. "I have a surprise for you," he told her, as he opened up the tin and inhaled deeply. "Fresh-baked oatmeal raisin cookies," he chuckled, plucking one out and holding it in front of her. "I made them myself," he continued before blushing a bit. "These are my third attempt," he admitted. "The first two, they didn't come out so well." He took a bite and chewed thoughtfully. "They're actually not too bad." He waited for a moment before nudging the box a little closer to her. "Well, they're right here, if you change your mind." "Now, where did we leave off?" he wondered, before nodding as he found his bookmark. "Here we go," he sighed as he began to read aloud. Charlotte and Wilbur were alone. The families had gone to look for Fern. Templeton was asleep. Wilbur lay resting after the excitement and strain of the ceremony. His medal still hung from his neck. By looking out of the corner of his eye, he could see it. "Charlotte," said Wilbur after a while, "why are you so quiet?" "I like to sit still," she said. "I've always been rather quiet." "Yes, but you seem especially so today. Do you feel all right?" "A little tired, perhaps, but I feel peaceful. Your success in the ring this morning was, to a small degree, my success. Your future is assured. You will live secure and safe, Wilbur. Nothing can harm you now. These autumn days will shorten and grow cold. The leaves will shake loose from the trees and fall. Christmas will come, and the snows of winter. You will live to enjoy the beauty of the frozen world, for you mean a great deal to Zuckerman, and he will not harm you, ever. Winter will pass, the days will lengthen, the ice will melt in the pasture pond. The song sparrow will return and sing, the frogs will awake, the warm wind will blow again. All these sights and sounds and smells will be yours to enjoy, Wilbur. This lovely world, these precious days." Charlotte stopped. A moment later, a tear came to Wilbur's eye. "Oh, Charlotte," he said. "To think that when I first met you, I thought you were cruel and bloodthirsty." When he recovered from his emotion, he spoke again. "Why did you do all this for me?" he asked. "I don't deserve it. I've never done anything for you." "You have been my friend," replied Charlotte. "That in itself is a tremendous thing. I wove my webs for you because I liked you. After all, what's a life, anyway? We're born, we live a little while, we die. A spider's life can't help being something of a mess with all this trapping and eating flies. By helping you, perhaps I was trying to lift up my life a trifle. Heaven knows anyone's life can stand a little of that." "Well," said Wilbur, "I'm no good at making speeches. I haven't got your gift for words. But you have saved me, Charlotte, and I would gladly give my life for you. I really would." "I'm sure you would. And I thank you for your generous sentiments." "Charlotte," said Wilbur, "we're all going home today. The fair is almost over. Won't it be wonderful to be back home in the barn cellar again with the sheep and the geese? Aren't you anxious to get home?" For a moment Charlotte said nothing. Then she spoke in a voice so low Wilbur could hardly hear the words. "I will not be going back to the barn," she said. Wilbur leapt to his feet. "Not going back?" he cried. "Charlotte, what are you talking about?" "I'm done for," she replied. "In a day or two I'll be dead. I haven't even the strength enough to climb down into the crate. I doubt if I have enough silk in my spinnerets to lower me to the ground." Hearing this, Wilbur threw himself down in an agony of pain and sorrow. Great sobs racked his body. He heaved and grunted with desolation. "Charlotte," he moaned. "Charlotte, my true friend." Teddy paused, his voice catching in his throat. "Sorry," he said after a moment. "I can't believe they let kids read this stuff," he mumbled, shaking his head. "I was surprised when your mother said it had been your favorite." He sighed and marked where he'd left off. "How about we finish this tomorrow?" he asked brightly, as he fished around in the bag he'd brought with him, pulling out a hairbrush. "I know how important looking your best means to you," he smiled, standing up and moving to her bed, as he began to carefully brush her hair. It wasn't easy with her lying down, but he separated one lock at a time and smoothed them out, bringing back a luster to her thick brown mane. "You know, you're about due for a trim," he mentioned, taking some small pleasure in the simple task. We could let it grow out, I suppose. Would you like that? He stood there for a moment and sighed, putting away the brush before pulling the chair closer to her bed. Teddy took her hand and held it in his as he watched her breathe silently. This was always the hardest part of his visits, when he ran out of things to say. Her still face betrayed no emotion, even as he desperately searched for a hint, a sign, anything that might suggest she could sense he was there. Teddy fought back tears as he closed his eyes, pressing his forehead against her hand. "Please," he whispered, that single word far more eloquent than any prayer. The door to her room opened, startling him out of his reverie. "Forgive me," the man said as Teddy stumbled to his feet. "I didn't mean to intrude. I was just making my rounds." "Hello, doctor," he said politely. "We were just—" His voice trailed off to silence. "I was wondering, has there been any change in her condition?" he asked hopefully. Dr. Angelescu sighed and shook his head. "I'm afraid not. Catherine is in a persistent vegetative state, and sadly we've seen little to no activity in her cerebral cortex. Given the severity of her injuries—" He shrugged. "I'm sorry. I wish I could offer you something more encouraging." Teddy nodded, unsurprised by his answer. "Doctor, look, I know this is your field, not mine, but since the accident—" His jaw clenched hard for a moment before he shook it off. "I've been educating myself on her condition, learning as much as I can. Anyway, I read about a treatment that supposedly has had some real success. DNS, I believe it's called." Angelescu nodded and held open the door. "Why don't we step into my office so we can talk?" he suggested. Teddy followed behind him as the walk down the corridor, before stepping into a comfortably furnished space. The physician seated himself behind his desk as the scientist sat down across from him. "DNS, or direct neural stimulation, is a proven procedure," Angelescu explained, "and we have seen some remarkable recoveries in several cases. However," he said carefully, "that being said, it is my professional opinion that Catherine is not a good candidate to undergo the process." "But why?" he blurted out. "If there's even a chance—" Angelescu sighed once again, rubbing his eyes. "Look, Theodore, may I call you Theodore?" Teddy nodded as the doctor continued. "DNS isn't a magic bullet. It's not a miracle cure. What the process does is stimulate the neurons and synapses of the cerebral cortex, in effect, to jumpstart the cognitive functions once more." "I was able to glean that much from the articles I read," Teddy agreed. "But I don't understand why you're saying that Catherine isn't a good candidate." "Because for the procedure to be effective, there has to be something there," he explained patiently. "In Catherine's case, given the extent of her injuries—" The doctor paused for a moment. "Your specialty is computer science, as I recall, yes?" "It is," he nodded. "Then let me put it in terms you may be able to better relate to. Think of her brain as a computer. I know it's a poor and incredibly overused analogy, but bear with me. And the injury she suffered, in effect, wiped the data from her memory banks. What DNS does is, through tiny electrical charges, is urge the memory chips to begin functioning again." He gave Teddy a sympathetic look. "But if there is no data to work with, then all the stimulation in the world won't make one bit of difference." Teddy looked away for a moment, his facial features hardening. "But the brain has built-in redundancies, doesn't it?" he said after a moment. "That's how stroke victims and others with brain injuries are able to eventually recover, by rewiring the pathways around the damaged tissue. Isn't that correct?" "In essence, yes," Angelescu admitted. "But, may I be blunt, Theodore?" "I'd actually prefer that," Teddy said evenly. "I'm a scientist. I prefer the facts, even if they aren't what I want to hear." "I understand," he said gently. "In my line of work, I see hundreds, thousands of cases like Catherine's. I speak with their families, try to offer some measure of hope. But in cases like these, hope can be a double-edged sword. To watch someone you love slowly wither away, praying desperately for a miracle year after year." Angelescu shook his head. "It can eat at you, Theodore. It can destroy you from within, which is why I try to make it my policy to never offer false hope. I give the patients' families the best information I can, but the very last thing I wish to do is add to their pain by giving them the sense that a cure is just around the corner." He gave Teddy a gentle smile. "The odds of Catherine recovering from this are slim." Teddy closed his eyes and bowed his head. "But not zero," he said quietly. "No, not zero," the doctor agreed. There are still many things about the brain we don't fully understand, and sometimes our patients surprise us. He was silent for a long time before rising to his feet. Teddy walked around the small room, observing the various plaques and mementos, before finally facing Angelescu once more. I understand what you're saying, Doctor, truly I do, and I appreciate your honesty. But even if there's the slightest chance, he gripped the back of the chair he'd just vacated. Catherine is a fighter. I have never in my life seen someone fight so hard for something they believed in, for someone they loved. His voice cracked with emotion. I can't give up on her. I can't! Since I met her, she never once gave up. She never quit fighting. His voice dropped to a whisper. And neither can I. Angelescu nodded slowly. I understand, he said at last. Despite the nature of her injuries, physically she is in good condition. Were she to undergo the procedure, I would expect the possibility of infection or other complications to be minimal. Thank you, Teddy managed to get out. How soon can you schedule the surgery? It's not that simple, I'm afraid, the doctor replied. The procedure is by its very nature invasive. Legally and ethically, I cannot schedule any surgery until I have signed consent from her next of kin. Send me the forms, Teddy said quietly. I'll go talk to her mother. Chapter 26. Teddy had a smile ready and waiting when the door opened. Theodore! What a pleasant surprise. Come in, the woman told him, ushering him inside. Hello, Maggie, he told the older woman, giving her a brief hug before she closed the door behind him. It's good to see you, Maggie said happily. I just made a fresh pot. Care for a cup? That would be great, thank you, he smiled as she busied herself in the kitchen, before returning moments later with steaming cups of coffee, as she handed one over. Have a seat, she smiled as they both sat down. What brings you all the way out here? Not that I'm not happy to see you, she chuckled. Teddy took a sip of his coffee before setting it down. It's about Catherine, he told her. There's something I'd like to discuss with you. Maggie closed her eyes and nodded her head. I had a feeling that was the reason you were here, she said quietly, as her good humor suddenly dissipated. Teddy, I can't go through this again. I just can't. I know, he said softly, and I understand. If it wasn't important, I wouldn't be here. He paused for a moment before deciding to plunge straight in. There's a treatment available that could help her, but they need your consent. She took a deep breath and opened her eyes. You must think I'm a horrible mother, she told him. I can't even bring myself to visit my own daughter. Of course not, he said gently. I know how hard this is for you. Maggie looked at him with a melancholy expression, before rising to her feet. She crossed over to the other side of the living room and plucked a framed photograph from the mantel. This was taken the day she graduated from the academy, she said wistfully, tracing her fingers across the protective glass. She carried over to him, placing it in his hands as she sat down beside him. She was so happy that day, she continued, so proud. And I was proud for her. Her whole life was ahead of her, and anything was possible. Maggie's eyes grew misty as she gazed at the image. Teddy held the photograph in his hands, imagining what that day must have been like for her. Catherine and Maggie were posing for a camera, their arms around each other's waists. The family resemblance was unmistakable, but where Kat's jawline and cheekbones gave her an almost fierce countenance, Maggie's facial features had softened with time. Kat had been caught mid-laugh, and he wondered what had amused her so, while Maggie's eyes twinkled with the pride she felt for her daughter. This is how I like to remember her, she said quietly. Seeing her the way she is now, it just breaks my heart. Maggie, he began, before abruptly handing her back the picture and rising to his feet. I know what you're thinking, and you're right. I can't let go. And this procedure, I won't lie to you. The odds of it making one bit of difference are almost non-existent. If there was any other way, I'd spare putting you through this all over again. It's just... He suddenly felt 1,000 years old. Kat and I, there was something special between us. A connection I've never felt with anyone else. But with the war and then the accident, his jaw clenched in a hard line once again. Whatever chance we had, it was stolen from us. Only I just can't walk away from what we had, what we might still have without doing everything I can. no matter how insane it looks to anyone else. The older woman regarded him silently for a moment. "It wasn't an accident, was it?" she said softly. Teddy flinched, as in his mind's eye he watched Catherine fling out her arms yet again, while Bjarnason raised the weapon. "I can't talk about that," he said hoarsely. Maggie seemed to be steeling herself for some reason, gathering her resolve. "Theodore, Catherine had many friends, people she served with. Several came to see me after—" She froze before trying again. They didn't know much, but they'd heard rumors. They didn't want to share them, but I can be persuasive when I want to be. Teddy looked up, and in that moment he saw Catherine in her mother's eyes, that same resolve he knew so well, that same fierce spirit. "I don't doubt that one bit," he smiled. She nodded at the compliment. "I've never pressed you for details. In many ways you were hurting even more than I was. But now, coming to me with this, I need to know." Maggie looked him dead in the eye. "Was Kathleen involved in something shameful?" "What?" He couldn't have been caught more off guard than if she'd suddenly sprouted wings. "Of course not." "I have to ask," she continued, not letting up. It almost seemed as if she'd been preparing herself for this moment for a very long time. But it seems as if someone, or even many someones, have gone to a great deal of trouble to keep the facts hidden. I even asked the Navy myself, only to be told it was classified. She sighed heavily, but kept him under her gaze. "And then there's you. All my instincts tell me you're a good man, a decent man. What I've been able to learn from other sources seems to bear that out. And yet—" Maggie grimaced for a moment. "And yet you spent time in prison. Not long, but the fact you were sent there at all, and then released without explanation." She shook her head. "Theodore, I have to know." Teddy sighed. "Now I see where she gets her determination from." He moved back to the sofa they had been sharing and sat down beside her. "Catherine wasn't involved in anything shameful, Maggie. I give you my solemn word on that. Quite the contrary. But I can't tell you any more, for a number of reasons." He reached out and took her hand, and for her part she didn't flinch. "Yes, I was in prison. Briefly, I'd like to tell you that I was falsely accused, but I wasn't." He gave her a bittersweet smile. "But I swear to you, Maggie, that what I did was for a good cause. At least, I think it was, and so did Catherine." He squeezed her hand. "But to tell you any more, it wouldn't be safe." Maggie seemed to be lost in some distant memory, as her lips curled up in a smirk. "Catherine did everything with intensity, Theodore. She threw herself into life, that she might find herself fighting for something she believed in, despite what others might think. I have absolutely no difficulty imagining that." She turned and smiled at him. "And I have no difficulty understanding what she saw in you." He blushed furiously, making her chuckle. "I'll bet she thought that was adorable, didn't she?" "Mostly she teased me about it," he admitted. "Of course she did. It was her way." Maggie squeezed his hand. "Give me the forms. I'll sign them." Teddy lifted his head and looked at her. Her eyes were as wet as his, but there was a light there as well. "Thank you, Maggie," he whispered. Teddy anxiously rose to his feet as Dr. Angelescu entered the waiting room. "How is she?" he asked. "The surgery went well," the doctor smiled. "There are no signs of complications, and she's currently in recovery." "So, when will we know?" he pressed him. "Theodore, even in the most successful cases, it takes time to see improvement," he explained. "The procedure, in a way, is much like introducing yeast into dough. Only in this case we use nanorobotics to build thousands of fibers to stimulate the cortex. It takes time, even with the computer interface to act as a guide. In effect, we're growing the threads we'll be using into her brain. That's not something you want to rush." "No, of course," he nodded. "I understand completely. But, if we were to see signs of improvement?" "Give her a few days," Angelescu smiled. "She could use the time to adjust to the after effects, and I imagine you could use some rest. Go home, spend time with friends and family. Come back refreshed." "I'll try," Teddy said unhappily. The doctor placed a hand on his shoulder. "I want to caution you once again about expecting too much. My prognosis hasn't changed." Angelescu shrugged. "Still, no one would be happier than I to be proven wrong." "No doctor," he said after a moment. "I can think of 2 people who would beat you to it." Chapter 27. To say the days passed anything but swiftly was an understatement. Teddy tried to follow the doctor's instructions, but all he could do was think of Catherine. Sleep only came at the point of exhaustion, and it was far from restful. Finally, at the end of the week, he was given the okay. He was at her bedside the next morning. Thankfully, they'd finished Charlotte's Web. He wasn't sure he could take another book like that. At Maggie's suggestion, they'd moved on to A Wrinkle in Time, which at least didn't seem to be obsessed with death, despite some of its odd concepts. He'd baked more cookies, chocolate chip this time, only burning the first batch, nibbling on them as he read aloud to her. After a few hours, he set the tablet aside. They'd shaved her head for the procedure, so he couldn't brush her hair, and frankly, seeing the odd metallic cap attached to her skull made him uncomfortable. Hidden underneath was the hardware connection that was already at work, sending electrical impulses into her synapses, though he tried not to think about that. Even though he'd browbeat almost everyone into approving her for the surgery, the thought of thousands of tendrils drilling into her brain made him queasy. So instead he held her hand and prayed. He had no idea how long they sat together. Keeping track of the time during his visits quickly made an already painful experience excruciating. Instead, he found himself marveling over the little things like how delicate her hands really were. He'd always pictured her as a two-fisted warrior, yet somehow he'd missed how slender and fine-boned they were. It made you wonder what other things you missed, especially when you were off fighting wars behind enemy lines and... Teddy almost shrieked when her hand suddenly spasmed. "Catherine?" He barely managed to get out, afraid he'd break the spell. Her hand lay still in his once again, and after a minute, he finally let out the breath he hadn't realized he was still holding. A fluke then. Teddy tried to keep his disappointment buried, but after pinning all his hopes... Wait, were her eyes moving? He leaned in, gasping as he realized they were twitching around, as if she were dreaming. "Catherine! Oh my God!" Teddy managed to get out, before one of her legs snapped taut, almost flopping off the bed. Doctor." "Doctor!" he shouted, as all her limbs began to thrash about. The hand gripping his threatened to yank him off his feet. When suddenly her eyes snapped open with a look of panic. "Doctor!" Catherine looked as if she was suffering from a grand mal seizure, as Dr. Angelescu and a pair of nurses burst into the room. "Step back," he ordered, moving Teddy out of the way as the three of them tried to keep her from throwing herself out of bed while they checked her vitals. "Catherine? Catherine, can you hear me?" Angelescu asked loudly, hovering over her, when suddenly her back arched high off the mattress as she gasped loudly for oxygen. She seemed to hang there for a moment before collapsing back down with a muffled thump. "BP is 130/78, one of the nurses informed him, "but I think it's spiked. Looks like it's coming back down. Temp is 36.8 degrees C, pulse is 72, and respiration. She's hyperventilating a bit, but that seems to be steadying as well." Angelescu plucked a small light from his coat and shone it in her eyes. But even from where he was standing, Teddy could tell she was having difficulty tracking it. Her eyes seemed to lack coordination as her head lolled about, when all of a sudden she seemed to be looking directly at him. "She!" Teddy's jaw dropped. "Is she trying to talk?" he asked hoarsely. "It's certainly possible," the doctor replied, as he leaned in closer. "What are you trying to say, Catherine?" he prompted her. She tried again after a moment. Catherine looked angry for some reason, but the expression quickly passed as she tried once more. "T-t-t-t-t," Catherine managed in a strangled voice as she looked directly at him. "I think she wants to speak to you," Angelescu smiled, moving out of the way so he could step in. Teddy sat down on the bed beside her, taking her hand once more. "It's me, Catherine," he told her, as he was overcome with emotion. "I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere." A crooked smile appeared on her face as she gazed up at him. "TD," she said happily, gurgling with joy. She held his hand fiercely, refusing to let go, as he broke down at last. Teddy sobbed as the others looked away, not wanting to intrude on the moment, as Catherine continued to coo and make noises, some of which almost sounded like words. "Oh God, Cat, I can't believe it," he blubbered, as she finally began to settle back down, her grip starting to loosen. His eyes went wide in panic as she appeared to begin drifting off. "Doctor!" Give her something, he shouted frantically. Don't let her go back to sleep. It's all right, Angelescu said gently. She's not falling back into PVS. Her EEG looks very encouraging, he explained, as his checked the readouts. Alpha and beta waves look strong, and while the gamma waves are still suppressed, they're far higher than I would have expected to see so soon. He placed a hand on his shoulder. She's simply exhausted. It's not every day you come back to life. Teddy looked back down at her face, and there was a peaceful smile as her eyelids fluttered. You're sure? He whispered, terrified to take him at his word. I am, he smiled. Of course, I'm also the one who said it was unlikely she'd ever recover, so what do I know? Angelescu grinned at him, and before he realized what was happening, a ragged, desperate laugh broke free of his chest. I'll give you a minute, but she really needs to rest now. He nodded unhappily as he looked back at Catherine. I'll be right here when you wake up, he promised as he bent to gently kiss her lips. He felt her struggle to return the gesture, but it was vague and uncoordinated. I love you, Cat, he said softly as she drifted off to sleep. Angelescu carefully led him out of her room as he slumped against the wall. My God, I can't believe it, he stammered, his body shaking like a leaf. To his credit, the doctor let him pull himself together, waiting patiently before Teddy finally had the presence of mind to speak to him. It's incredible, he said in amazement. But, Doctor, I don't want to sound ungrateful, but she seems so... Teddy struggled to find the words, but luckily Angelescu stepped in to save him from himself. I know I've been the one to urge caution through all of this, but the fact she bounced back this quickly after the procedure, coupled with what she was able to accomplish on her own in just a few minutes? His grin seemed to threaten to split his face in two. Give us 6 months to work with her, with physical and speech therapists, along with neurological rehabilitation. Theodore, you won't recognize her. His smile softened as he squeezed Teddy's shoulder. Or perhaps I should say you will. I can't promise she'll be exactly like she was. There was significant brain damage after all. There may be a loss of motor function, or she may suffer from cognitive lapses. She'll need support for what's coming because it won't be easy. Cat's a fighter, he said fiercely. She'll do whatever it takes, and she'll have me with her every step of the way. I never doubted it for a minute, Angelescu smiled. As I said, don't expect her to ever manage a complete recovery. But 90%? Maybe even 95%? He shrugged, but there was hope in that gesture. That's not outside the realm of possibility. Teddy reached out and shook his hand. Doctor, I don't know how to thank you. I'm afraid I deserve very little of the credit, he admitted. From where I'm standing, there's only 2 people responsible for her recovery, Catherine herself and you. It's all her, Doctor, he said in embarrassment. I was just the stupid SOB who didn't know how to give up. And thank God for it, he chuckled. Now if you'd like, I can arrange a bed for you here, so you can be with her when she wakes up. I'll gladly take you up on that, Teddy grinned. Right after I make a call.